Welcome, everyone, to week 2 of our course. Today's lecture is titled Temples, Tablets, and the Law, Gender in Mesopotamia. We'll be diving into how women operated within and were shaped by the structures of religion, economy, and law in Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia, often hailed as the cradle of civilization, was a society of first. It was the first writing system, the first early urbanization, and of course, one of the earliest comprehensive legal codes, Hammurabi's Code. But beneath these innovations lies a complex and often contradictory narrative about gender, power, and social control. Today, we're going to explore these tensions and consider what they reveal about how ancient Mesopotamian society imagined, regulated, and performed under gender. Mesopotamia was not a monolithic culture, but a patchwork of city-states like Lagash, Sippar, and Babylon. Each of these had its own traditions, cities, and socio-political structures. While kings and priests left their names on monuments, much of everyday life, especially the lives of women, is documented through administrative tablets, religious hymns, dowry contracts, and legal codes. These sources both reflect normative ideals, but crucially, the social anxieties of their time. Women's roles were highly contingent on class, occupation, and familial status. A priestess of Ana in had vastly different experiences than a female brewer or a textile worker or a household slave. Induana, the daughter of Sargon of Akkad and a high priestess of the moon to the moon god Nana in offers a rare example of a woman whose voice survives in her own words, and temple hymns and political poetry. She wielded both spiritual and ideological authority, suggesting that elite women could, in exceptional cases, actually exert real influence. Temples were not merely spiritual centers, but complex economic institutions. They owned land, employed laborers, stored surplus grain, and issued loans. Women could serve in specialized temple roles, such as Nadatu priestesses, particularly in religious cities like Sippar. These women were cloistered, they were celibate, and technically removed from family life. Yet, paradoxically, they enjoyed legal rights such as property, ownership of property, the ability to sign contracts, and they could even adopt an heir. This clerical seclusion, thus, offered women a kind of liberation from the patriarchal expectations of marriage and childbirth. It's a striking paradox. Religious restriction opened venues for legal and economic autonomy that were otherwise closed to most women, which suggests that the boundaries of gender and power in Mesopotamia were not simply hierarchical, but contextually contingent. So let's look at Hammurabi's Code, right? A foundational text for understanding the legal formalization of gender roles. Dating from the 18th century BCE, this code was inscribed on a stele and publicly displayed as an emblem of royal authority and divine justice. The code covers a vast array of social interactions, but women appear most frequently in laws concerning family, sexuality, inheritance, and status. The laws draw a sharp line between women as dependents, daughters, wives, widows, and as agents of disorder, adulteresses, sorceresses, or unruly wives. It's worth noting that the legal identity of women was often defined in relation to a man, daughter of, wife of, or mother of. Consider the laws 195 through 196. If a son strikes his father, his hand shall be cut off. But if a father sells his son into slavery to pay a debt, this is legally permissible. Gender and generational hierarchies intersect here. Just as women are disciplined through laws on sexuality, children are subject to paternal authority without reciprocal protections. Yet there are provisions for women's legal rights, especially in economic terms here. Widows could hold property in trust for their sons. Daughters could inherit the absence in the absence of a male heir. Contracts, including marriage agreements, were legally binding and enforceable. And these documents survive in the thousands, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets. Moreover, the courts sometimes intervened to protect women's interests. Law 142, for example, allows a woman to seek divorce if her husband is neglectful or abusive, though she must prove her case. Such clauses suggest an effort to balance patriarchal order with social stability, especially in urban contexts where disorder threatened civic cohesion. So let's pause for a second and look at things theoretically. All right, we're going to use Judith Butler's text, Gender Trouble. And though it's written in the late 20th century, this provides a powerful framework to interpret these ancient texts. For Butler, gender is not a stable identity, but a repeated set of performative tasks that becomes naturalized over time. In Mesopotamian society, to be a woman was to act according to ritual, legal, and social expectations. So one's going to bear children, you're going to manage the household, display chastity or modesty, and fulfill religious roles without any transgressions. The law codified these performances, punishing deviations as threats to the social fabric. The intersection of gender and ritual is especially vivid in temple ceremonies. Consider the Herigos Gamos, or sacred marriage rite. Right? It's a ritualized sexual union between the high priestess and the king, believed to ensure fertility and divine favor. Here, gender is ritualized and mythologized, reinforcing roles while wrapping them in some kind of cosmic significance. Looking at cultural memory, Jan Assmann's theory of cultural memory reminds us that history is not merely about recording events, but remembering in ways that serve present purposes. The law, code, religious liturgies, and temple inventories were curated memories, tools of institutional control. Written texts in Mesopotamia were produced and preserved by a literate male elite. Consequently, the archived privileges male voices in public institutions, yet women emerged from the margins through lawsuits, dowries, contracts, the bureaucratic residue of the lives lived in negotiation with power. We might think of this as an archival palimpsest. Beneath the male-dominated scripts are the faint voices and traces of female agency. However, we see a widow petitioning for land, an adatu buying a house, a slave woman named in a dispute over paternity, and each instance actually complicates this narrative of passivity. So let's confront the central question that is in today's lecture. Can we speak of female agency in Mesopotamia? The easy answer is no. The structures of law, economy, and religion overwhelmingly favored men, yet the reality is so much more textured. Agency, as a feminine historian, Joan Scott, reminds us that it need not be absolute to be real. It exists in the intersex, in strategies of survival, in adaptation, in micro-resistances embedded in that daily life. For instance, textual evidence from the Old Babylonian period shows women suing over inheritance rights, managing businesses, adopting children, and in some cases, women even served as witnesses for legal contracts, an act usually reserved for men. These glimpses suggest that Mesopotamian women were not only objects of the law, but occasionally the subjects as well. So, to summarize everything we talked about today, gender in Mesopotamia was a social construct reinforced by religious, legal, and economic institutions. Hammurabi's code did not merely reflect patriarchy, it actively produced it, but with contradictions that allowed for some limited female agency. Theoretical frameworks like Butler's performativity and Assmann's cultural memory push us to read these sources not just for what they say, but for how they shape collective understandings of gender and power. And then finally, we must be wary of imposing modern categories of victimhood or autonomy too neatly onto the past. The lives of Mesopotamian women existed within inside a spectrum of regulation, resistance, and negotiation. So thank you for your time. In our next session, we are going to turn our attention to ancient Egypt, and we are going to examine how royal women participated in and sometimes disrupted the ideological foundations of kingship. Thank you very much.